Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, it's almost 1 year to the day, January 28th, when Jake Muzzin became a Toronto Maple Leaf. So let's look over the trade and how it's treated the team thus far. So we have here up on the screen the details of the trade. Jake Muzzin was traded from the Los Angeles Kings to the Toronto Maple Leafs for forward prospect Carl Grundstrom, defenseman prospect Sean Durzi, and a first-round pick in the 2019 draft. Carl Grundstrom, so far to begin his NHL career, looks like he's going to be a player that'll hover around 30 to 40 points a season so far. So like a middle six forward. And the Maple Leafs have an abundance of those. And they traded him for Jake Muzzin. Jake Muzzin, of course, being a defenseman, something that they need. So far, so good with the trade. Sean Durzi, a right-handed shooting defenseman, might be a little bit more valuable to the Toronto Maple Leafs right now, but it's not like this guy's looking to make an impact on an NHL roster this year or even next year. Also, something to point out, Sean Durzi has a lengthy injury list, and I don't like to use that against a player or anything like that because, I hope everyone has a long and healthy career. But it has slowed his role in the OHL, and I'm not sure if it's been a factor in the AHL yet, but in 30 games this season, 9 points is not anything that you're going to be missing. Now, the first round pick, the LA Kings used it to select Swedish left-handed defenseman Tobias Bjornfot. Now, depending on who you read or who you talk to, they have this prospect ranked a little bit differently. He's got 10 points in 29 AHL games, and you might be saying to yourself, that's not too impressive. Well, he's doing that in the American Hockey League as an 18-year-old. So up on the screen right now is a list from EliteProspects.com, and it's defensemen in the American Hockey League under the age of 19, their individual seasons from the 99-2000 season to this current year. And as we can see here, Rasmus Sandin, Slava Voinov, Timothy Liljegren, Moritz Seider, I believe, who was the 6th overall pick in last year's draft, to the Red Wings, Oliver Shillington, who was a really highly touted prospect the year before his draft year and in his draft year, Hampus Lindholm, and then Tobias Bjornfot. So when we look at the trade again, I don't want to necessarily write off Sean Durzi. He is still only 21 years old, but again, 21 years old, 9 points in 30 games in the American Hockey League for a defenseman that's touted for his scoring is not overly impressive. Carl Grundstrom, a middle six forward, probably closer to the third line than he is a second liner, and Tobias Bjornfot. We saw the comparables on that list, and all of those guys are young and up-and-coming defensemen or already effective in the NHL. And then there's Jake Muzzin. Cap Friendly currently has him listed on LTIR, and I believe he was placed there on January 12th, and if I'm reading the rules correctly, when a player is placed on LTIR, they need to stay there for a minimum of 10 games missed, or 20 days in total. So from the 12th, 20 days after the fact would be about February 5th or so when he's eligible to come back. The Maple Leafs have already called him up after a conditioning stint in the American Hockey League, so it's only about another week or so before we see Jake Muzzin back into games. And then there is this little tidbit from 31 Thoughts, Elliot Friedman's weekly column, saying that no confirmation from either side, but it sounds like there is engagement in a contract conversations with Jake Muzzin. There's no debate about his value and unique skill set on this roster. Term is as big as the salary, as Muzzin will be 31 next month. Now, I don't want to get too in-depth with the fancy stats on Jake Muzzin's play and whatnot, because during his tenure here in Toronto, he's looked like the Maple Leafs' best defenseman at times, and then he's also looked like the worst defenseman on the team at other times, but it's not really fair to judge his play. In terms of just judging the overall trade, it's unfortunate that he's spent 2 different stints injured now. He was obviously banged up going into the playoffs last season, and then this year breaking his foot, I believe. So it's really hard to judge his actual play, but for those who want to see the fancy stats, he's okay in terms of Corsi for percentage relative to his teammates, but when you're looking at expected goals relative to his teammates, it's a little bit of a harder judge, but I don't really want to put that too much on Muzzin, because like I said, you can't really judge a player who's played injured. So with Elliot Friedman mentioning that Jake Muzzin and the Leafs are talking contract talks, what's a fair contract for Jake Muzzin? Well, in order to do that, we need to head on over to CapFriendly.com. And CapFriendly has a very unique tool where you can compare hypothetical contracts to actual contracts that have been signed in the NHL. And my proposed contract to Jake Muzzin is $6.75 million a season for 4 years. That 4-year deal would take him until he's 35 years old, and like Elliot Friedman said, the term is just as important as the money. If Jake Muzzin wants more term, that annual asking price has got to come down. It basically boils down to what you're comfortable with, because if you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs cap situation moving forward, guys like Kerfoot, Johnson, Kapanen, Hyman would all need new contracts 4 years from now. The entire blue line and Frederick Anderson by then. So when you look at the type of players that you need to re-sign in your lineup, are you comfortable with having Jake Muzzin on your team making that much money? Well, there's one player on this list of comparables, if we go back to it, that stands out a little bit more for me, and that's Ryan McDonagh. When you look at Jake Muzzin and Ryan McDonagh, to me, they play the same style of game where they're a little bit physical. They can chip in on the power play, chip in on the penalty kill. The signing age is very similar, 30 versus 31, and the number of games played and points at the time that the contract would be signed is very similar. But you're going to notice Ryan McDonagh signing a 7-year deal. I do think that Ryan McDonagh is a little bit better than Jake Muzzin. So let's say both sides are in agreement. They like my contract proposal of $6.75 million for 4 seasons. What would that look like in the scope of next year? Because next year is a really vital role in the window of contention for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Well, if we go back to Cap Friendly, I prepared a little bit of a thing here. Let me explain some of the things that are on here. If you're confused where I got the salary cap, the $83.5 million number from, no, that's not a number that's been confirmed. But what I did in a previous video was I looked at how the salary cap has increased from year to year since the NHL first introduced it, and that would be an increase of roughly around 2.5%, which is what it's been going up by for the last couple of years. Travis Dermott I have on here signing a 3-year, $3 million contract, so you're paying him a little bit more than what he's probably worth, but you're getting a little bit more term. Contract comparables for him would include guys like Travis Sanheim, Darnell Nurse, Josh Morrissey, Neil Pionk, and Brandon Carlo. And I believe the league minimum salary next year is going to be around $750K. So you find 2 guys for league min, slot them in on the 4th line, and then you got a little bit of extra money to go out and finally solve the backup issue. And that's it. I mean, I know a lot of people want to yell and scream that the Toronto Maple Leafs are in cap hell. Not really. I mean, they could still afford to get a Jake Muzzin like I showed you and get a backup goalie next year. And I mean, if you're looking at the scope of things, they add Rasmus Sandin full-time. They add Timothy Liljegren full-time. Travis Dermott has an extra year of development. Next year's team can be even better than this year's team. So overall, I know this video kind of evolved from talking about the trade to looking at the Maple Leafs cap situation for next year, but I think that both teams got what they needed, right? The LA Kings got a little bit younger, the Leafs got a defenseman to fit their window of contention, who's possibly looking at re-signing with the team, so it works out for both sides. And this video doesn't lock anything in, these are just my opinions right now. Right now, re-signing Jake Muzzin at that price would make sense for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think it's a fair value. But 2 months from now, when we revisit the subject and it actually needs to happen, things might be different. But leave me a comment in the comment section on whether you think the Toronto Maple Leafs should re-sign Jake Muzzin. Leave me a like on the video if you did like it, and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And guys, like I said in the last couple of videos, the Toronto Maple Leafs are still making the playoffs.